You know, the Blule Springs in New Zealand has some of the most pure and clearest water in the world. The unique blue-green hue of that spring supplies around 70% of New Zealand's bottled water and stays cold all year round. The water flowing through the springs takes about 100 years to filter through the surrounding rock, which is why the water is so pure. Welcome to Kaleidoscope, where we supply your weekly dose of everything positive, daring, different. On the show today, port pressure, curbing the wild side and showcasing some of feminism's most defiant voices. You can find Kaleidoscope on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and like us if you want more. Our wonderful partners on the show, SriLanka Live, CDB, and The Daily Morning. Thank you.
She wins with CDB Wings, exclusive financial solutions for women.
This is CDB Snapshot, and I'll look back at the week that was. Sri Lanka's manufacturing PMI rises to 62.2 in July from June's 51.9 points. The number of active credit cards in Sri Lanka increases by 10,934 in June from May. Sri Lanka imports $318 million worth of used Japanese vehicles in the first 6 months of the year. Look up. There are rope canopy bridges over some roads in Sri Lanka to help monkeys cross safely. UK's 10-year-old Bodhana Sivanandan becomes the youngest female player to win the International Chess Master title. Women in Iraq establish its first ever women's political party.
You focus on your goals. We will take care of the risks. SriLanka Life.
Welcome. This is SriLanka Live News Capsule. While global freight rates surged over 300% in 2020, South Asia moves 15% of global container trade, and Sri Lanka sits at its heart. The Port of Colombo handled over 7.8 million TEUs in 2023. But there are bigger problems on the horizon: corruption, inefficiencies, and policy inconsistencies. Immediate past chairman of the Sri Lanka Shippers Council and the Global Shippers Council, Sean Van Dort, doesn't mince his words. He is on Kaleidoscope News Capsule. You called out corruption very, very strongly at the AGM recently. How are you planning on alleviating corruption, which is rampant, like you mentioned?
Firstly, there should be a paradigm change in the private sector. The private sector is the biggest giver of underhand payments to any authority, customs, etc. The other way to change this is to bring the digitalization piece, where this face-to-face meeting mania has to stop. Until then, this will happen. And accountability should now be kicked in on compliance issues with all the importers and exporters. Otherwise, we'll be talking this for the next millennium.
Ground realities of actually making this happen.
Number one, the ground reality is the government has to have the will to change the customs ordinance to make it more user-friendly, bring it to the 21st century. Draconian laws are established. And the digitalization has to be coupled with the simplification of tax regimes. HS codes, for example. We have complicated our tax regime so much that gives room for people to manipulate and to do the wrong thing for their personal gain only.
Sri Lanka's constant refrain, strategic location, all is good, but is this actually enough to get ahead in the game?
The beauty queen Sri Lanka is no more attractive only on its beauty. There are other value additions that our neighbors are offering, which is far greater than what we can offer. Not that it's all doom and gloom, but again, policy inconsistencies of policies are the biggest problem. Nobody wants to come and invest here Because Sri Lankans, when they go abroad, they want to have 100% shares. When they come here, they want it has to be a partnership where Sri Lankan companies own more majority shares than the others. So who wants to come in here? Nobody's going to come. They want control of their money. So that is the biggest challenge I see as a country. If we turn that page, I think there's so much to be gained.
What do you say to the naysayers who do not want liberalization to happen?
That has been a perennial issue for us. Maybe I would put it this way, 300 to 400 families who directly benefit from these closed economies on the shipping and logistics. They will always be naysayers. But look at the overall market conditions. Because you liberalize, all the shipping lines are not going to come and set up their own offices here. There will be still space for everyone to grow. The multiplier effect will kick in. And I am 100% positive because you look at Singapore, you look at India, they have opened up and they are moving forward. We are opening up, closing the door, opening up, closing the door. So I think we're on a bad wicket on that point.
And so, here's our market sketch this week. The all-share price index at the Colombo Stock Exchange continued to break all records, with 20,700 points being reached this week, while turnover levels continue to remain promising at between 6 to 10 billion rupees per day. Oil prices remain steady at above $62 per barrel, even as China's Russian Urals imports rose to nearly 75,000 barrels per day in August, and India's intake of Russian oil halved to around 400,000 barrels per day, as US pressure discourages spot purchases. Gold prices moved down after reaching highs of $3,400 per ounce and closer to $3,300 as traders awaited fresh US data before making their next move. The city of Nanjing in China is home to the world's largest beer collection, with seemingly one bottle or can from each of the world's beers laid neatly in walls that seem to go up forever. Sri Lanka's lush natural heritage powers its global tourism brand. But a new report by the Centre for a Smart Future warns that this very relationship is fast becoming destructive. From Yala's overcrowded safaris to fragmented park governance, the cracks are widening. Research associate Senith Abeyanayake joins us to unpack the findings and explore why a radical rethink of tourism and conservation is urgently needed. Tourism is built on nature, but at the same time it also harms it. How do we fix this contradiction?
So I think the first step is to really shift the focus to the long term. We see from tourism policy right now, all the way up to a lot of the tourism actors, there's a big focus on catching up with lost growth, bouncing back, which means we are targeting more footfall, more revenue in the short term. But the problem with that approach is that it takes the natural resources that tourism depends on. It can be waterfalls, it can be the mountains, as a given. But we know that that is not the case because in Sri Lanka, the natural resources are fast depleting. So we need to really think about the long term, and by the long term, I mean beyond the electoral cycle, 10, 20, 50 years, figure out the tourism vision for that long term and then work backwards, because then we will be able to understand the foundations that we need to put now to make the system better. And we are talking really about sustained returns. So it makes business sense because you're talking about sustained returns compared to a caffeine hit of short-run profits, which won't be able to sustain itself and it will taper off.
Do you think conventional tourism policies are actually failing to manage this complex system?
One reason is because current Sri Lankan tourism policies don't consider tourism as a complex system. What do I mean by that? To me, at least, I think tourism is very different to other sectors because tourism deals with likes, dislikes, and behavior of people, which are constantly changing. So for an example, if you go to Yala, it's very hard to draw a line and say this is where tourism starts and ends in Yala. Because from the tuk driver to the local restaurateur to the religious institutions, all of them interact with tourism in many different ways. So if tourism policy doesn't recognize the interconnections, then we are fundamentally off to a wrong start. So I think having rigid, siloed tourism policies don't take this complexity into account. So therefore, we are dealing with outdated policies in a constantly changing environment. Add to that political influences and lack of enforcements, and then you're going to have a lot of the conventional problems that you see.
There's so many in this ecosystem of tourism, in the wildlife park system, who depend on tourists. There's also the problem of overcrowding. How do we manage that?
You can't solve the problem of overcrowding at the gate of the park. You can't just be like, we are only going to let 100 or 200, 300 jeeps in per day. That has been the approach that we have taken in the past repeatedly, and that has failed. Because the underlying structures, like the increasing number of hotels in the park, the increasing politicization in the park, is constantly pushing against these regulations. And what you see then are these regulations failing. So if we really want to manage overcrowding, we need to bring actors not just in the park, but we need to start with the people and the institutions who manage these lands. We need to bring the hotels on board. We need to bring the tourists and other associations on board to get a broad, wide understanding of how each of these stakeholders contribute to and play a part in this system. Without having that understanding, we can't just stop things at the gate.
Do you think all these agencies, entities that you mentioned can actually ever work under one roof?
As an optimist, I think they can. But more realistically, I think they must. Because when I did the research, there wasn't an indication that I got that there was comprehensive coordination. I do not know why. But we have seen in many other instances where different actors have come together. If we think about instances like the Pico Trail, you have government and private organizations coming in. So it's not impossible, and it's definitely not unnatural for the Sri Lankan context. I think it requires a bit of political will. And also, I think it requires a bit of understanding. All these institutions will have to make compromises. And I think those compromises will then form the platform for effective coordination to happen. So it can be done.
So there's a combination of managing tourism and wildlife conservation. Going forward, what are you seeing for both these?
Of course, as we see, tourism is bouncing back rapidly, and there's a reason for that. Sri Lanka has so much to offer, but if we don't protect what we offer, then we are not going to be able to sustain why tourists would want to keep coming back to our country. And we see wildlife, and not just wildlife, we see nature depleting. So it's critical that we must strike a balance between these two forces in order to make sure that there's a mutually beneficial outcome. And I think there are a lot of government officials who are doing great work under very, very scarce resources. So I think if we are to balance it further, we need institutions which are independent and institutions which have resources, and ultimately institutions that are exposed to world-leading expertise. So I think if we can build that culture and build that resource base and expertise, we should be able to strike a balance.
An exhibition on art and feminism, the empowerment of women, was on at the JDA Pereira Gallery recently. Empowerment isn't just an exhibition. It's a global conversation on art and feminisms in the 21st century. Born at Kunstmuseum Wolfsburg in Germany, the original exhibition brought together 100 artists and collectives.
The exhibition is very thoughtfully curated around the idea of what is feminism, what is a level playing field, where are we equal, where are we not, where do we come together to celebrate, and what are the areas in which we need to look deeper, reflect as men, women, whatever our gender and sexual identities might be.
The South Asian edition, presented by the Goethe Institute, journeys from Pune to Delhi to Colombo. Across 7 chapters and 31 feminist voices, it challenges power and inequality in a powerful celebration of inclusion and rights.
Every work speaks to someone, if not everyone. There are some which are really touching works as well, and there are some that actually celebrate life.
Time to relax? We'll catch you next week.